So, all right. I have put the slides for tonight on Moodle. If you guys want to go, I'm going to display them too, but I'll put those up there so you can grab them. They're right underneath the right underneath the week of February, 4th of February through the 10th of February. It's right underneath there. It should be there now. So, I want to start class with questions this time instead of at the end. Oh man, one more person. There we go. So let me before we get going, let me answer any questions anyone has about anything. Well, not anything class related. Can't be just like can't be like random. Anybody have any questions?
I have a question. Maybe it's a silly question, but are we able to upload two files at the same time? Because I did two different files for the mock assignment, and I don't know if we can upload two, or can we just go? It has to be just one file.
Yeah, just one.
Just one, okay.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah, you can put. I think I don't remember what I put in the email or the message, but you can put the assignments on the same document if you want, and just upload them together. For some reason, Moodle doesn't do that. I'm not sure why. You can only upload one.
Okay. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So the format I used for the reflection paper so far, I've done one for the first session. And what I did was I used the questions from the assignment description, and I just use that as like subheadings. Is that okay? And can I use that format for both reflections?
Yep. Yes. Okay. Yes to both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a reflection paper, not a report or a research paper. So there's not like a set format. So yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I actually would probably prefer that, just so I can track what you're answering. That would probably help me. Yeah. Is that Grape Crush?
No, I try to avoid sugar, so it's actually like stevia soda, but it is grape flavored.
Man, it's taking me back to when I was like 9 years old. Grape Crush, man. Grape and strawberry. Yeah, back in the 80s, man, we took in sugar like it was nothing. We didn't even care. Just wrecked our bodies. We didn't care. All right, any other questions?
Me.
Yes, sir. Go for it.
I'm trying to put it on my mic.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Can you hear me? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm not that tech savvy, so the screen changed up on me. But I just been noticed. I don't know where to find the partner information at so that I can get these assignments done.
The assignments on Moodle.
Mm-hmm.
It's a mock sessions assignment.
Yeah, but I thought we supposed to have a partner to do it with.
Yeah. Hang on a second. Yeah, right here. Hang on a second. Let me get over it. Let me get to the right place. So I'm gonna tell you the right thing. Sorry. I opened too many things and it makes me lose where I'm at. Hang on just 1 second. So here's the mock session pairings right here.
Oh, well. Okay.
Um, yeah, so this, it's the,
I completely missed this. I'm gonna have to
yeah,
apologize to the partner.
yeah, right here. So yeah, it's on Moodle. You can grab it. So
All right,
yeah,
thank you.
I know that some people had trouble getting a hold of people, and I think what I had been telling people is if you had trouble getting a hold of your partner, I'd said like find someone, you can find someone else to do it with, or another classmate or something. And I realized we're kind of getting late in the semester, so it's like, we got 2 weeks left
All right.
after this week, so that means you're gonna have to hustle.
Yes, I am.
All right. Any other questions? Anybody have answers? All right. No answers. Well, let's get started. Here we go. We're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about marriage and family therapy assessments. On Saturday, we're going to talk about personality and intelligence. I'm going to kind of put those together, and then behavioral assessments. And I'm also going to, and then the last class will be focused on ethics and cultural competencies. Whenever that last one is, I can't remember. Like it's, yeah, the 18th. Okay, so that's kind of what we'll line up between now and then. So tonight I'm going to go through MFT assessments, and this class will be, the assessments for marriage and family therapy are going to be somewhat different than other assessments that you might do for, let's say, learning disorders or anxiety, depression. There's a lot of there's heavy observation and heavy inference and heavy asking questions and observing and watching two things at once sometimes. And I'm going to go through all that as we go. The first thing we're going to talk about will be, let me get to this. I hate when it does that. I don't know why it does this. Okay. The first thing I'm going to talk about will be the systems approach. Now, some of you might have had Dr. Hubbard's class, his couples counseling class. So he talked about systems theory in there. I'm assuming he did.
Yeah, it was awesome, that class. It was a long time ago, but he's great.
Yeah. So systems theory, I'm going to give you guys about 3 minutes worth of systems theory. That's like volumes of work. I'm going to give you the 3-minute version, and then we're going to expound on it as we go. And it's a little different than psychodynamics or just straight psychology. One of the things that happened over time as psychiatrists especially began working with people, they noticed that individuals that had certain mental health issues, they started to notice patterns in some of the families that they work with, the people they work with, especially some of the interactions of the families. And they began to kind of focus on not just the person, the individual, but some of the interactions of the families. And then that's kind of how family therapy was born, basically. And to use a really good theory, they started using what at the time was called general systems theory, which was an old in physics, it's been around for a long time. Goes back to before World War I. But they started using that idea of general systems theory, and they started applying it to mental health issues. So what the heck does that mean? The way you can think about it would be every system or every whole has parts, and there's parts that make up a whole, and you can't have a whole without the parts. And if one part of that system changes, the other parts change too. And what they started noticing is if they could change some interactions in some of the families, that the individuals would change. And actually, then they started noticing the families would change. And so they stopped focusing just solely on the individual or the individual diagnosis or the individual problem, but the system and the interaction that was going on between them, which is kind of a unique way to look at things. And so this approach is very different than just a straight psychological, psychodynamic approach. It's very different because the approach is looking at the interactions between the parts. In this case, couples or families. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Dr. Hubbard used an excellent example where he said it's basically you're looking maybe like at a wind chime and how you have each of those tubes that hang off of it and how they, bang and ding and they make a noise together because one bumps off another and affects the others. So
that's right. That's right.
I like that analogy.
Yeah. Yeah. The way you can, when you work, if you use this systems theory approach, you can actually see it work. Like you can see as you change people's interactions, you can actually see it happening. And that's part of, and so if we know that, then that's also something that we can work to assess, like the actual interactions between people. And so when we think about marriage and family therapy as a whole, marriage and family therapy is based on systems theory as a whole. Okay. But you can use systems theory, the approach of it, to do some really good assessments, I think. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So I've given you like a 3-minute version of what's, systems theory. Okay. The biggest piece of this, especially when we're talking about assessing, is you're not just looking at the individuals, but the dynamics and the patterns of the interactions between the individuals. So that would be true if you're working with a couple, if you're working with parent-child, if you're working with a whole family. I've worked with friends before. In the past 2 years, I've worked with more adult children and their older parents, like children in the 40s, 50s, and parents in their 60s and 70s. And I've worked with both sides of that. That's been very interesting. I've worked with couples for a long time, and all kinds of different couples, all kinds of different ways. And if you can, the quicker you can start to assess the things that are going on, the quicker you can start helping them. Now, sometimes you make your assessment based off whatever model of therapy you're using too, and I'm going to talk about that kind of as we go through too. We're not trying to identify just a problem, but we're looking at like the relationship status and the attention to the interactions that may be changed or have changed or have occurred over time. It doesn't mean that the individual issues aren't important, because obviously sometimes individual issues are what it's at the cause of some of the change in interaction. One of the things that we know about divorce is, if you look at the literature, it's pretty plain that except for traumatic situations, divorce does not occur all of a sudden. Divorce occurs because of things that happen over time. And divorce occurs because of lack of attention and focus over time, not just like overnight. And so we know that. And so that's literally saying interactions are changing slowly but surely in a negative way over time. If you read literature from people like John Gottman, John Gottman's done a tremendous amount of research, and he has basically started to come. He started to. I don't know if I have the book in here with me. He's got the 7 principles of marriage now, the relationship cure, 8 dates. He started to come up with basically these small, measurable interactions that you can have with couples, and that's what he's teaching, which is very, if you think about it, things like rituals, hello rituals and goodbye rituals. Well, before you leave, you do something. When you come home, you do something. Things like the 30-second hug. Things like gratitude lists. Those are things that are directly related to how people interact with each other, which is really fascinating. And so when we think about families, we can think about it very, very similarly. We need to understand how the network of the systems work, how they interact with each other, right? And so, when I'm going to talk about a couple of visual things we can do to assess that too, when we get to it. So we look at the environment, we look at the interactions, we look at obviously the individuals. Has there been, I haven't talked about trauma a ton, but has there been a trauma that occurred in the family or to an individual that affects it? Things we bring from childhood, we want to know about those things too. And so there's a host of things that we want to know. So how in the heck do we assess that? And there are some pencil paper assessments. When I say pencil paper, just keep in mind that I mean they can be electronic too. But there are ways to do more formal assessments as well. Okay, now there's a couple of things that are hard about assessing couples and families. It's one thing is defining how we assess it and the variables, because you're talking about assessing. If we think about it this way, so I'll just use a couple for like assessing a couple just for simplicity. We think about a couple, okay? You're going to assess what's going on with them individually for sure, but what's going on between them, right? So you can think of the content is what you're hearing from them, like that's your content. But the process is, you got to measure the processes or the interaction between them that can appear invisible a little bit. So what's really hard about assessing is assessing that middle part, that process part, that interaction between. There's no assessment that I know of that measures that. We have a lot of great assessments, but they assess the individual couple or the individual pieces of the family or the individual pieces of the system, not necessarily the interactional pieces, which means we need to be able to do that. Does that make sense? Sometimes I miss my big whiteboard because I draw this and it's visual, but does that I want to make sure that makes sense, because that is one of the big difficulties for assessing couples and families, is that it's really hard to assess that interaction, that process between them. Does that make sense, hopefully, to everybody? Okay.
It does to me.
Okay. Sometimes it's hard this is the one that's become more and more difficult. How do you assess and manage different perspectives? Right? Inevitably, people are going to come and have a perspective that's based on something, and the other person might have a totally different perspective. I don't know about you, all of you that are married. I just had this semi-heated discussion with my wife the other day about something that we both saw. And I saw it one way, she saw it another. We've known each other 25 years. We saw it totally different. Now, who's right?
She is.
No.
Kidding.
No.
It's a joke.
She's not right, but I'm not right either. Right? But that's part of how we assess. You can find out a lot about even those small discussions. I've had sessions that started off kind of fun and laid back, and then we get to something, it's a trigger, and it seems like it's nothing, like taking out the trash. and all of a sudden we got full-blown conflict. Or who does the dishes? Like, just like role things, like who does what, when, who has a perspective of XYZ. I remember, people can say, I remember you said this, then this and this and this. We think our memory is solid and is rock solid. Our memory is not. Our memory does not work well, especially in emotional situations. Right? So anytime someone says, I know exactly what happened, you probably know pretty much what happened, but you can't know exactly. You're not going to remember it all. Now, as a therapist, you're not going to say that, but you're going to ask more questions about it. Okay. That last one, the norming samples, that's kind of going away. There's a lot more work that's being done to do that. That's not as big of a deal. Let's talk about I'm going to talk about like family interviews real quick, and then mapping techniques, which is a lot more fun. The mapping techniques is kind of some fun stuff. And so like family interviews, like when you first meet with people, obviously you're kind of like trying to get information. So you're looking at the structure and composition. What are their family processes? Are there rules that are written down for a family, and are there unwritten rules too? You want to know about those things as well. In other words, every family typically has, if you can think about your own family, every family has unwritten rules. Like, this is how things work. It's not written down. You just know it, right? You just know what they are. And you find out what unwritten rules you have when you get married, or when you have someone that comes in new to the family and they go, why do y'all do that? I don't know. That's what we do. It's an unwritten rule, right? Some unwritten rules are fun. They're cool and they're great. Some unwritten rules are like, that's weird. That's a weird one. Why do we do that? I don't know. Well, that's what my parents did. Why did they do it? I don't know. That's what their parents did, right? So what are the process, or what are the patterns? You can see patterns fairly quickly if you ask enough questions, especially over time. What's their affect? How do they organize themselves? Who's different from who? And are they different on purpose, or are they different for a reason? And you can ask all those kinds of questions. So you're looking at the dynamics, and you're looking at the interactions at play. Now, the mapping techniques, which I like mapping techniques a lot because they're more visual. I'm super visual, so I like those. You're collaborating with them, you're getting them involved, you're asking a lot of good information to help them start thinking even about their family dynamics themselves. You're trying to get information and observe their dynamics while you do, but the mapping. If you take I think Dr. Hubbard does the genograms at least in one of his classes. It's super, this is a great tool to use. I actually use this a lot with everybody I work with. Sometimes now I just kind of do it in my head because I've done it a lot, but now we got fancy stuff, like there's apps now, and there's stuff online you can download whole things on, which is awesome to do. When we think about genograms are just like the family tree on steroids, because it's basically like 3 generations of interactions and patterns and dysfunction and function and rules and interactions. And it's like you can have a whole great big huge mess of stuff to look at. So there's 3 steps. You first map out the third. If you can get the 3 generations, that's what you want to do. So you start with both sides, right? So if I had a husband and wife, I'd start the husband's side. I'd try to get 3 generations on that side, and the wife, I'd try to get 3 generations. And this takes sometimes 2 sessions to do. And you start recording just basic information. When did they get married? Are they still alive? Where's anyone divorced? Did anyone die? Did they have kids? And then you eventually map down to where you're working with and looking at the couple. By the end of it, you're looking at things like addiction or mental health issues, or how interactions happen, like were people distant with each other? Was there any cutoff relationships? Were people like get along really well, or was it too enmeshed? And once you get done with it, you can actually, what I do with it is I do the whole thing, and then I go over it with my client, because this is like an assessment, like a pencil paper assessment that I feel like they need the results of. So I share it. So I'll share and let them look at it. And we've talked about it. We've talked through it. And a lot of times, 9 times out of 10, they look at it and go, oh my gosh. And they make some really profound discoveries about themselves when they're looking through it, which is what's really cool about it to me. I'll give you a couple of examples. This is when I first started out. I think this was like this might be my second semester seeing clients in my master's program. And I had started as a couple, and then the husband only came once. But I worked with the wife. She was working on some things separately anyway, so I ended up being individual. I did a genogram with her, and so we did the whole genogram. We did 3 generations, went all the way back, and I got to the end, and we were going to do the report the next week, and she brought her daughter, and her daughter was 13 or 14, I can't remember. And I didn't know she was doing that, so I stopped her before she came in. I said, hey, we're going to go over this report and look at your genogram. And she was adamant she wanted her daughter to see it. And I was like, okay, so it was a little bit weird. So we did the whole kind of report, and her daughter knew a lot of the information. Come to find out, she knew a lot of information. The mom and daughter had a pretty fused relationship, so it was a little bit of oversharing anyway in her life. So one of the things that had happened with her was she was the 3rd generation to become pregnant in her late teens, get married to an abusive alcoholic spouse, 3rd generation. And you got a 14-year-old sitting here, and her I'll never forget this as long as I live. The 14-year-old literally turned to her mom and said, I'm not going to do that, Mom. That's not going to be me. Which was interesting because I didn't bring any of this out. She saw it, and the mom was the one that was talking about it. And it was like overwhelming for her to see, because those patterns of interaction and how we respond to them aren't on accident. We respond on purpose a lot of times. And we typically respond with how we learn, or the ways in which we learn, especially if we don't have agency, or we learn that we have agency in our life. Eventually, as we get old enough, we can have agency or choice over our choices. Like we can choose to do things or not do things eventually. But if you live in certain types of family interaction patterns, that might not be in your head. That might not be something you're thinking about. In other words, I do this because we always do it. I work here because that's where we're supposed to. This lady was, 2 generations away from basic poverty. Her grandparents were in poverty, very impoverished, had really difficult life. I mean, she was only 1 generation away from that. And so socioeconomic status is another thing that you want to look at. Cultural questions. I've done this with people from different ethnicities and different cultural backgrounds, and you're going to ask questions about that too. You're going to want to know, hey, how much of this is from is inside your culture? Like, what's your cultural model here? Like, how's that informed in your life? Does that make sense? It's just a really good, rich way of asking questions and really getting some really good information. And it's definitely making inferences and kind of creating hypotheses and kind of following them up to kind of see which ones kind of stand or not. Okay. It's not like this particular type of technique is not one that's heavily researched necessarily. So there's probably not like a ton of reliability, validity studies that have been done on it, on genograms. At the same time, they're also super effective in giving you a lot of really good information, especially if there's some difficult cases, and especially if you start to kind of feel like maybe there's something that's happened back, generations past, that maybe is still affecting the generations in the present. Okay. Any question about that one? That's a really good one. Okay. Family sculpting is one of my favorite activities to do with families. And in class, I do it with people in class, but so basically the idea is that sometimes families don't know how they interact, or they don't understand it, or someone's been trying to tell the other family members what's going on and they're not listening, or they don't hear them. So sometimes you can show them, and this is a way to show family interactions. And so basically the therapist is the sculptor. Okay. So you're the only one that moves family around. No one touches each other. No one does any of that. You move them around, you put them in positions. And it typically, I like to pick maybe an activity. Like I'll start small, like, hey, let's place everyone in your house. And I use the room. Let's place everyone in your house at night at 7 o'clock or something like, I might do something like that. And I like to start with the person that I feel maybe has the least amount of power in the family. And it could be anybody. I start with that person. And that person tells me where to put people. So I might put, mom and dad in a room by themselves, and one kid in their room and the other kid in their room, or something like that. We might do that. And you can use the phone, like you can have them use the phones if you want, or something. You can use objects if you want. And then you can do the same thing, sculpting with like relationships. Show me how mom and dad interact, or how they get along. And you basically have them put mom and dad in whatever position, and you sculpt them. Show me how dad and son get along, or dad and daughter, or whatever. You can do there's any number of things you can do, whatever you can kind of think of. And a lot of times you'll get the ideas for the sculpting in the conversations that you've had with them. Like if they come in with an issue already, that's kind of what you probably want to figure out. And so this just is like a visual representation of their perspective of the interactions of how the family works together. Does that make sense? If I was smart enough. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question. So I understand you're moving the people around, but then are they pretending to act out something? Or they're just relationally where they're standing, like they could show themselves very distant if they
could turn their back to each other, they could point their finger at someone, they could be like this, they could be
I understand.
You sculpt them however they tell you.
It's almost like charades.
A little bit, yeah. A little bit. Okay. A little bit, yeah. If I was smart, I would have picked out a couple of videos and put them on. Maybe I'll do that. But you can look up videos of family sculpting sessions. And again, it's with your style, and it comes off of whatever information you're gleaning from the family. I like this one a lot. This one's a lot of fun to do. And you can do like fun things too. Like you can do fun, silly stuff. Like if you have little kids, you can do fun, silly stuff. The people that I've done, the biggest family I've ever done this with is a family of 7. There were mom, dad, 5 kids, and it was 13 down to 5, I think, or 6 or something like that. And that was interesting. I had to get a bigger room for that one. That one actually got a little bit out of control, but it was fun. It was fun. Let me look. I'm looking for something specific. I kind of talked about this earlier, just like the instruments that we have now, like if it's a marital assessment instrument or a family assessment, is really the individual takes it and you get an individual scoring, and then you try to make inferences off that, right? That's kind of how they work. And so they don't really assess or describe the family system or the process or interactions, but in the system. So that's kind of a down side of any of the assessments that we have. I like to get as much information as I can off of how people interact. So let me give you an example. I might be asking questions about, so I'm an emotionally focused therapist too, so I'm going to get to some eventually like emotion type questions, but I also pair that with some interaction questions like, I don't know, I notice that you seem to be upset. Is this something that's new? Is this, no, I get upset about this, you know, I find myself getting sad and then I get mad. And so I might say, well, when you get sad or when you get mad, what do you do? What happens? Right. And then you're getting into what they actually like a behavior. And most of the time that behavior is between, you know, if it's spouses between them. Now, sometimes you don't need to ask, they'll just do it in front of you. They'll just, you know, sometimes they come in and you know they don't like each other. Like even when I do virtual sessions now, I mean, I can immediately tell when I do a virtual session that they're not happy, even just through the video. You know, it's not hard, and you can still feel it. You can feel the tension too, and so that's interaction. That's the stuff you want to know about. You want to know about those things. You want to know, like you can ask other questions like now I wouldn't ask this at the beginning. This might be 3 or 4 sessions in, like as you've kind of established what you're doing. You might start getting into things like, hey, are there topics that are really difficult for you guys to talk about that you find yourself either arguing about or having conflict or maybe just ignoring? Those are things you want to know, because those are also heavy interacting types of things that are happening with them. They're individual thoughts, but they're doing interaction with each other. And if you can help them with how they interact with each other and change how they interact, you change a lot of what they do, for sure. So those are just some couple of things. Now we can talk about formalized assessments. Prepare and enrich. You can get certified in prepare and enrich. You guys can do that now if you want. Prepare is for premarital, enrich is for marital. They're super good. These are really good assessments. I think I've used both. They're very good. Prepare especially is very good for premarital. I actually use some of the premarital or prepare handouts with some of my couples sometimes, because they've got really good, like just basic things like assertive communication and conflict management and things like budgeting. Even sometimes you can give them sheets like information on that, and how to have hard conversations. There's just some handouts that they do a really good job with that I use with some of my couples sometimes. Like we'll do the exercise in the session and then I'll give them handouts so they can take it with them. I started doing that maybe about 3 or 4 years ago. The dyadic adjustment scale is okay. It looks at the adjustment quality, how couples adjust. Let's say, you know, when a couple has something like a new child, there's an adjustment period that happens, or something like a move, or anything that happens in their life, there's adjustment. I think the marital satisfaction inventory is a really good assessment tool. It looks at is it 11 or 12? I think 12 different areas or 11 different areas of their relationship. One of the ones it looks at that I like is how they do conflict, and the way it's actually scored. When you score this particular assessment, it actually gives you, like, there's a range of scoring, and it goes from like light white all the way to dark red. And if they score in the dark red, that's like immediate, you need to talk about these things. And if there's dark red in some certain areas, that also tells you like, hey, this is going to be a hard conversation that we probably need to have. Like if it's conflict management, if it's dark red, that means maybe there's actually even some violence or there's some type of abuse happening. So that's stuff you would want to know. But that's why I like that one, because it doesn't just give you a number. It actually gives you a color. And it tells you like, hey, this one's probably one. And there's like some grids to it that kind of tell you a cutoff that you should be looking for. The MSIR is a very, very good assessment. I think that one's actually digital now, or you can get it electronically. The great thing about electronic assessments that you can get, you can find them anywhere. The hard part is all the publishing companies are purchasing them and their copyrights, and you have to pay for them. Still, that's the hard part. FACES is one for families. I have never used the FAM or the Family Environment Scale. I've used FACES several times. FACES is a fairly detailed, intricate assessment. There's a pretty healthy manual with that one, but it's very, very good because it runs off the idea that families that are the most flexible, the most adaptable, but not overly flexible or overly adaptable, typically do best. So, and that's actually, the literature will bear that out. The literature will tell us that if families can be adaptable, which if you think about it, makes common sense, and flexible, which again, if you think about it, makes common sense. Those ones that can be adaptable and flexible with things like how they communicate, how they do certain boundaries, how they do certain roles, how they do certain rules, how they do certain guidelines, probably how they take in and think about information. If they can be flexible and adaptable, typically they do the best. So it's basically a circumflex is a square with the corners are the extremes, and it's looking at flexibility and adaptability, and the extremes you don't want to be. And there's 4 squares in the middle. If you get those 4 squares in the middle, that's the most healthy. And so each member of the family will take the assessment, and then you score it, and then you actually map what that family member said in a box. So mom and dad could say 1 square, and all the kids could say different squares, which is in and of itself super fascinating, really. And so basically you're looking at flexibility and adaptability, like in communication even. I like to talk about it with them also, especially if they have teenagers, because I've done this most with adolescents. This is a healthy conversation to have with them if their teenager perceives inflexibility, but the family perceives it to be overly flexible. In other words, sometimes what that means, you get to do more than I ever got to do, but the kids are like, I don't get to do anything my friends get to do, right? So now we're having some really interesting conversations, right? But what they've said, you see it right there. I mean, it's black and white. You can see what they say. So what you then do is say, hey, how can we get everyone, how do we get in the middle? How do we get into this middle square? Then you're not doing it. You're helping, you're enlisting them to thinking through what's going on with their life, right? Does that make sense? Flexibility and adaptability is extremely important in families, extremely important. Not over flexibility, not over adaptability, and not under adapt, not rigid and not chaotic, right? Stretchy, kind of like Stretch Armstrong. Now, I'm really dating myself tonight. Remember the old Stretch Armstrong? I don't know what the heck that thing was. There's no way that was healthy for the environment, whatever that thing was made out of. But things that stretch, right? Things that stretch but don't break. Things that can be flexible and bendable can be very, very helpful. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Let's shut that down. Okay, now let's talk about some group stuff. Here's what I want to do. I want us to I'm going to put you in breakout rooms. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It'll be like three or four in a breakout room. So here's what we're going to do. I want you guys to talk about 2 things. The first thing is and this is what I do with clients when I talk about adaptability and flexibility, typically. I want you to think about your growing up. Okay, so take yourself back to childhood. And when I say childhood, let's say our adolescent time, middle school, high school. Okay. On a scale of 1 to 10, or no, let's say, yeah, scale of 1 to 10. I perceive that my family, one is they were like, you know, super like inflexible. One is like I didn't get to do anything. I had super strict rules. 10 is like I didn't have any rules. I didn't have anything. I could do whatever I want. And then obviously anything in between. That's the first thing. You're talking about your childhood, those adolescent years. Okay, you share that with each other. And then the second thing, what I want you to do is come up with 3 or 4 questions that you could ask families to try to figure out how flexible or adaptable they are. Okay, so first one's 1 out of 10. One is, and you could look at it as a continuum, I guess, is like, super inflexible, rigid to super over flexible. Where were you and where was your family? And 3 or 4 questions you would ask a family to figure out how flexible and adaptable they are. Okay, we're going to come back and discuss that. I'm going to talk about couples stuff specifically for a little bit, and then we're going back in our groups. I'm going to have you do something in dealing with couples. Okay. All right. I'll let you get. How long you guys need? Like 2 minutes for that? How about like 8 minutes?
Sounds
All
good.
right. All right. Here we go. Let's go there. All right. You should see it now. Sorry, everyone that's listening to the recording. Y'all missed a great conversation. Oops. Okay, there we go. This is Brofenbrenner's ecological construct here. Going off something Sarah was saying, this is a great way to look at how systems interact with each other, right? So at the middle, we'll have the individual. That could be you could put anything in there, but the individual. Then the microsystem is the family, church, neighborhood, peers, school. These rings interact with each other as we go out. They interact with each other. It doesn't just go one way, right? We might have friends of the family or neighbors, legal services, social welfare, mass media. Then the macro system are like ideologies of like that's your cultural types of stuff. But on the bottom down here, time is interesting because patterns occur over time and pass down over time. Patterning of environmental events affect people. My children know what mass shooter drills are. I did not. That's a piece of their upbringing. If you talk to them about it, they don't talk about it like it's traumatic. The actual drills, that's what they do. Right? That's just so when I was when I was my youth minister days, I was working in right outside of DC during 9/11. And that was obviously a huge event in our nation's environment and history that had a big impact. I also, during that time, I had students that I'd worked with that were on the campus the day that Virginia Tech school shooting happened, and some of them were like a building away. And so that's another, like those things are kind of like things that happen over time or in that chronosystem that also stay with people, that affect people. So I like this just because it's a good kind of depiction of how these different systems interact with each other. I think it's a good way to look at it. So I was meant to show that earlier and I just forgot, so I wanted to show you that. Okay. Now I want to transition to talking about working with marriages, especially when we think about assessing. And we've talked about a couple of these things already in terms of like assessing interactions and processes and nonverbals and things like that. So anytime that we think of couples, there's a couple of things that I think are important when we start thinking assessment. Like I personally think it's good to have a process that you follow when you're assessing, especially at the beginning. Now, that's usually specific to the therapist most of the time. I mean, my process is fairly straightforward in terms of like, I do a relationship history, like how'd you meet, when'd you meet, what was it like? Try to make it kind of fun too. And how'd you decide? I ask questions like, what made you decide to get married? Because I work with some people that aren't married, some people that are. I just got my first couple in the last like 2 years that didn't meet on a dating site. They actually met face to face. So dating apps are big right now, or have been for a long time. That's a whole dynamic you can talk about. So I'll do a full relationship history. The second or third session, I will do some form of like individual session with each of them. And I will ask them things like, hey, tell me, are there things that you want to talk about that you feel like are important, but they're really hard to talk about? And you know, if you bring them up, your partner's going to be upset or something's going to happen or something's going to go wrong. And it doesn't have to be like overly traumatic, but it could be really hard. In other words, what are things that they're not safe talking about, basically, with the other person? Because if I can help with that, that's why I want to help. I usually do that second or third session. That second or third session, I'll also do some form of like family history with each of them, help them understand. And I do that with them listening to each other. I want them to hear each other talk about it. I want them to hear each other's history, because sometimes they don't know each other's history. or they know stories, but they don't know the history. They don't know actually what things happen. So I'll do that. That's my first 3 sessions, maybe 4. All along those first 4 sessions, I try to do as much as I can to build safety into the sessions. And so safety and security are, to me, super important, obviously in therapy in general, but we want to build safety and security when we work with people, and you can assess if safety and security is there or not. Most of the time, it's not always safe. Physical safety is number 1. Emotional safety is number 1A. They're both extremely important, right? You can tell if one or both of them doesn't feel safe bringing up things. They'll either change the subject, they won't say anything, they'll make jokes, they'll go off course, they'll look at each other and ask and wait for the other one to talk. It's just little things you can tell. And when I say safety, it doesn't mean that they're afraid that there's going to be a conflict or a fight even. Sometimes it's that they've tried to bring something up before, it didn't go well. So if it doesn't go well long enough, what's someone going to do? They're going to stop bringing it up. They're going to stop talking about it. And then once they stop talking about it, that's usually when you've got issues, right? So those first 4 sessions to me are like, I'm trying to figure out like how safe things are, what we need to talk about. And I'm trying to kind of assess like, what's this interaction like what is going on? I like to kind of think of little T theory, not big T theory, but little T theory, like what's my theory about what's happening with the couple, right? I like to try to think about that. And then I start testing it and ask questions based on that. So that by the 5th session, we're hitting the ground running in terms of like communicate. We've already started, probably already started talking about communication because that's one of the first things we do. But I start teaching communication skills, conflict skills. If I work with couples that are, I've worked with a lot of pilots, and so I sometimes tailor like CBT approaches to a pilot and his wife, or her husband, or his wife and her husband, and I'll tailor that because sometimes they're over logic. They get really into the logic, and I might tailor things to help bring out some emotion for them. So sometimes you can be really specific. So that by the 6th session, hopefully by then, if there was like a lot of escalation, we've got that calmed down. But if there wasn't a lot of escalation, we've got we're really starting to talk about some really important things, right? Now, I wish I could say, well, it takes 10 sessions to work with a couple. That's not realistic. Most couples, the research will tell us, most couples wait 4 to 5 years too long to go to counseling. Around 4 to 5 years, which means 4 to 5 years of like, probably bad interactions. So everything that you're going to try to do to change that is going to take time, right? My personal opinion is 3 months is probably a minimum, I think. Because that's about 90 days. 90 days to make a habit, especially if you give them homework and things like that. So those are some of the things that you're going to think of. Now it depends. Also, obviously, there's lots of other components to it that you're looking at too. And if they've come in and they're automatically, the only time that I will tweak that approach, that kind of like 4 or 5 week approach, is if they've come in like a major trauma or like a major trust breaking has happened. I might speed up a couple of things because of that, so that we can de-escalate some things so we can actually do some good work together. Sometimes if it's too escalated, I might split them up for 2 or 3 sessions individually and then come back together too. So the reason why I'm saying all this is because, going back to what I said earlier, when you're trying to assess what the interaction between them, you're all the time trying to figure out, how can I change this interaction to help them? What things can we do to help this interaction? Is it not just what they're saying, but how they're saying it? For example, if if I want to communicate something to somebody and I say whatever I need to say, and then the response I get back is a little bit puzzling, anywhere from puzzling to angering, maddening, there's got to be something going on between when I said it and when they heard it and took it in and responded. Something's going on, right? So one of the first things that you can do, no matter who you work with, is teach them how to actively listen. And I think it's totally appropriate to do things like, hey, tell me what you're hearing me say. And I'll even do that in the session, like, hey, I think I'm hearing this. Am I hearing this right? Because if we're communicating something and what we're communicating is coming back at us differently, something's getting lost somewhere, right? So we have noise automatically anyway. The biggest source of noise that couples mostly have is emotion. Whatever emotion they're feeling is filtering whatever they're hearing, right? And so sometimes that's what it is. And if you can figure that out, that's super helpful. That can be really helpful. Okay. It doesn't take a ton of assessing to figure out if that's going on, because literally I've had sessions where one of the spouses says something to me. They're talking to me. They say the right thing that triggers the other spouse, and you can tell they sit on the edge of their seat and they're just waiting to talk. They're waiting to get their version out. They're waiting to get their perspective out. They haven't heard anything else that was said. They heard one thing and they're going to react to it, right? Because they've heard that before. Their brain is trained now to hear this one thing and react and respond. So we got to retrain that. We got to take care of that. I might have heard something totally different than what the other person heard. And I'll say that sometimes. This is what I heard. I heard these things. Is this what you're trying to say? Right? But you can tell. I mean, it's not hard to see. You can tell when that's happening. Does that make sense? What I'm saying? I'm trying to paint the picture. Hopefully you can see this. This is one of the things that happens for sure.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is too much of a tangent, but I guess it's not so much a consideration for you because you're married, but I was wondering if from your experience, maybe with colleagues, if a marriage and family therapist is unmarried or divorced, like never been married, does that hurt their credibility as a therapist or make it more challenging for them to get clients or for clients to feel like they're qualified to help?
It probably just depends on the client. I don't personally think it would. To me, the person's if a person does good work, they do good work. I mean, that's my opinion. Now, clients, a client might think differently. I mean, and I've heard the same. I've had the same discussions with back even now with, let's say, a therapist is younger, like maybe in their 20s, and someone that's in their 40s might not want to work with them because they're too young, kind of thing. That could happen too. So it's really, if the therapist and the clients have a good rapport, it doesn't really matter, right, about any of those other things. And so to answer your question, it's really up to the client more than any, I think. Because I've probably also lost clients because I'm a white male in my 50s. I could lose clients because of that too. I could not get clients because of that too, right? So I think that some clients will want to work with, maybe they do want to work with someone that's married because in their mind that's what they think is a good prerequisite for a therapist. But in my mind, a good prerequisite is able to build rapport and do really good work and help people. That's to me what's important. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm answering your question. I hope I am.
Yeah, appreciate that perspective because I originally was on the MFT track and I've never been married and I don't have any kids. And I asked a professor and he said, in his opinion, it does make a material difference. So I did switch to the LPC track, but I still think that's a good track for me, but I still entertain or ponder that question a lot.
Yeah. I don't think it matters. I think honestly, it doesn't matter what I think. It only matters what the client thinks. That's all that matters in any situation. If you want to be a marriage and family therapist, you should be a marriage and family therapist.
I'm on that track and I haven't been married, but I do have one daughter, but I've never been married and I'm 36. So
I've never snorted cocaine or been high or addicted, but I've worked with addiction.
Okay.
For a number of years. I've never been to prison. I work with prisoners. I mean, we could go down a list of like, do we need to experience all the things with the people that we work with in order to work with them?
I guess it kind of goes into the practiced response that I had rehearsed. If that became a question, I thought I would just say, well, for some people, marriage makes a better like subject of vivisection than a lived experience.
Yeah. I think it just depends on the client. Now, I can't predict it. You know, I can't predict what someone may or may not say. But I don't know that should, well, anyway, I don't want to get too personal, but
I want to say that I've been like unintentionally counseling people since I was in high school. People just open up to me. And I've had many couples open up to me and I've counseled them over the years. To this day, people are constantly calling me, coming to me, asking me for help. And these are married couples. I've had numerous married couples and I'm not charging them. It's for free. My whole life come to me. So I personally don't think it's a problem. It's more about your rapport, how well you listen. These married couples just want someone to listen to them and someone to engage with them. So I mean, yeah, there's going to be some, but even as an LPC, you're going to have people who don't want to come to you for numerous reasons, like Dr. Bedard said. I really think it depends on
I don't think it. I mean, it's really a personal preference for the client more than anything. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good question. Any other questions about anything that we're talking about? Okay. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go back into our groups. Let me get back. Go back into our groups, and this time it's going to be couple related. So I want you to come up with questions that would help you understand how couples interact. What questions would you ask them to understand how they interact with each other, how they communicate with each other, like any kind of interaction? What things would you want to know and what questions would you ask? Okay. A second. And I'll give you 2 minutes.
She used to live in my neighborhood.
Yeah, we were all like, what? Okay.
She has a daughter who lives down here though, so she would stay with her.
Yeah, she came to stay with her. Okay. What are we going to ask? What do we want to know? Because we're going to solve all these problems in like 3 sessions. So what do we need to ask?
I was saying that one of the first questions I would ask a couple is, how do you handle anger, dispute, or frustration? Do you communicate with each other? Do you open up to each other about it? Or do you hold it in? And then another question I would ask is, if you have a suspicion about something, or you know, something that you're observing that you don't like about your client, that your spouse? Do you communicate it, or do you hold it in and then explode later? To me, these are some vital questions to ask, because if they can communicate with each other and talk about what they're feeling or suspicions that they have, it could be nothing. Sometimes you think that, you know, your husband or wife is doing something, and then you just ask them about it and they explain it. You're like, oh, okay. But then you might go for a week or two just holding it in and let it build up and then flip on them about something else and then explode. And then they say, well, I wasn't doing that at all, blah, blah, blah. But then you already have these anger and feelings going on, and then you don't even think reasonably at that point. So communication, I want to find out how they communicate. If they have a problem, do they talk to them about it simply, and what way? And calmly discussing things right away, to me, is the best way to do this.
Okay. So some of that's about trust too, a little bit, sounds like. What else?
I think at the beginning of a session with couples, I think it's and then since they come to you with so much hurt and anxiety and pain and whatnot, and anger, usually it's kind of going back to the beginning, kind of going, what made you fall in love with your partner? You know, kind of reminding them of that past and the good times and the honeymoon phase of things.
Yep.
You know, what that, you know, they can maybe find some strengths there and build upon that.
We don't want to talk about that sappy stuff. Yeah, there's a little bit of literature on oxytocin levels that can be recreated, just remembering falling in love. So it's you can help couples recreate. Can you remember what the other person was wearing? Can you remember what you ordered if you went out to eat? Can you remember any of the messages that you sent each other that really stuck out to you? Like things like that, like specific, unique things that actually cause neurological changes in the brain. So yeah, that's a good one. Very good. Anybody else?
Dr. Bedard, I would ask how many years have they been married? Because I think years can reflect the way of interacting with each other.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, years of marriage is very important. The first 10 years are tough. Most of the research will tell you that the first 10 years is usually one of the toughest. There's a little bit of the divorce rate right now is climbing for people in their 50s and 60s, a little bit higher than it ever has been. There's probably a ton of theories about why, but that was happening before COVID too. So years of marriage does matter. Absolutely. Yep. Yep. What else?
Our group came up with kind of like a laundry list of questions. So one of them is your favorite and least favorite thing about each other, morning and evening routine, how often you're having date nights, who wears the pants, just to kind of like see what the reaction is, who is the first to apologize in a fight, how often do they communicate throughout the day, how do they handle conflict, and asking them to rate their ability to do that, and then give them a problem and ask them to solve it together, or use like role playing or games to see if they can cooperate.
Yeah, good. Some of those questions you just listed will definitely get a response. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Very good. What else?
One of the questions, what was their religious background?
Yeah. 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 And you can ask that in a number of ways, like even how they grew up, if they grew up differently religiously. Yeah, those are good. All those are good. any questions like that you want to know, even if you ask a question that doesn't get a response, it might be that it's too early maybe to ask that question, or too soon potentially. You just kind of wait. Most of the time, you might start with like close-ended questions, like yes or no kind of stuff, and then you're going to eventually get to the open-ended, right? Like what and how. I try my best to stay away from why. Asking why. I try my best. Why tends to not make people defensive, but a little bit of, like, defensively alert, I would say, typically. So if you can stay away from why, like even what brings you here today instead of why are you here, is just a little bit of a nuance there. But open-ended questions are going to help you. And then the last thing I would say is, once you kind of have a theory of what's going on, you can start trying to figure out, like, is one of the issues that one person thinks they're right and the other person's wrong, and vice versa. Sometimes people come to therapy to get validated that they're right, that their spouse is wrong or their partner is wrong. If you ever get wind of that, you need to probably jump into that immediately. Like I tell all my clients, like, I don't make personal decisions for people, and I'm not trying to figure out who's wrong or right. I'm trying to figure out how to help you. Right? So I try to frame questions that, like, if I ask something like that, I might ask it in a way of like, okay, who's right here? Or is this a difference? Is this a difference that you have, or do you see this as right or wrong? Because if they see something as right or wrong, then you're going to have a pretty long conversation and try to figure out what's going on with that. Versus, I see this differently.
Do you ever come right out and just ask in the very beginning, are you committed to making this work?
Absolutely. First thing.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. I ask them, I don't ask if they want their marriage to work. I ask them if they want to work on their marriage. So those are two different things to me. So yes, absolutely. And maybe it's
starting point, I would believe.
Yeah. And I think maybe just some of this is I think I was more patient when I first started out than I am now, in terms of like wanting to help people that want help. Like, if they don't want help, I can't help them. I mean, I can, but I'm tired. I'm just tired. I just want to help them. I don't want to have to convince them they want help. Like, I don't want to, like, the stages of change, right? If they're in pre-contemplation, where they are in denial and they don't really think anything's wrong, I don't have time for that. It's hard for me. I really struggle with that. Contemplation is good. I can handle that, and of course, action's awesome, because then they're in. So contemplation is fine, but they're like, I think something's wrong. I don't know how to fix it. I'm not sure what it is. I can handle that. That's great. But people that come, and you'll see that, you can tell if one spouse talks, the other person's just sitting there, one word answers. I might stop and go, let me just tell you what's happening. This is what it's going to be, what we're going to do. And I'm nice about it. I'm not like mean or anything, but and I'll tell them, I don't want to waste your time. I don't want, and I'm fairly expensive. I don't want to waste your money either. So, I mean, I don't think I'm expensive, but they think that, we'll go spend $250 on our hair, but we won't spend, we'll spend tens of thousands of dollars on a wedding, but not,
It's a lot more expensive to get a divorce, though.
Yeah, I've had that direct conversation with people. You're going to spend between $10,000 and sometimes $200,000-$300,000 on a divorce. You're going to spend $5,000 or $6,000 with me. You tell me where's your Where's your tolerance level? And sometimes that works too. But yeah, I'm very direct about that part in a nice way. I don't, I'm talking about it very directly with you guys, but I don't say it this way with them for sure.
So if someone says no, then you say, have a nice day, or?
Yeah.
I think though, like, because my husband and I went, and I remember feeling so relieved hearing him actually say to the therapist, like, yes, I want, to work on this. Like, yes, I want this to be successful. I mean, that was 5 years ago. So it worked, right?
Yeah. Well,
because half of it was that I was thinking that he was 1 foot out the door. And so sometimes I feel like being open and honest in the beginning makes the other person's anxiety kind of decrease right from the start.
Well, yeah, you can tell if they've already talked about it and they're both in, you can tell. And the other way you can tell is they get better and they're awesome and they're great. That's the other way you can tell. If a husband calls me, something's happened. Most of the time, 8 times out of 10, something's happened or something's gone wrong. If a wife calls me, 9 times out of 10, the husband doesn't even know. And I ask him, does he know that you're calling? Yes. Can you have him call me? I tell him, I want to talk to him too. We need to have this conversation. I don't want someone showing up. I had a teenager be brought to therapy one time, a 17-year-old senior in high school, be brought to therapy under the guise that his parents were taking him to get ice cream. So that didn't work very well. So I look at these other situations the same. Now I'm telling you what I think. Now you might talk to other professors or other therapists or clinicians that won't look at it the way I do. I think people do whatever they want to do. That's how people are. And if they don't want to change, they won't. And some people are cool with trying to convince people to change. That's great. I'm not one of them. I've done that before. I did that for a long time and I got burned out on it. And I don't want to do that anymore because it's really tiring. I would rather work with people like your husband. I want help. We need to get help. I'm like, let's go. We'll get help, and you'll get help quick, too. That's the other thing. So yes, I'm sorry, that's a long-winded. It's the end of the day, man. I'm just like tired and just talking about everything.
Do you find that like if one spouse is completely checked out, do you offer your services to the spouse that wants to remain, maybe do with that individual counseling at all, or no?
I don't. That's a conflict of interest to me.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it really is. If you start couples, you stay couples. If you start individual, you stay individual.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Okay.
The only time I've ever gone from individual to couple is if I'm gonna pick on Donna. Donna knows I pick on her. If I start with Donna and then she wants to do marriage counseling, then I'm gonna have to talk to Donna's husband for the same amount of time I talk to her.
Okay.
That's the only way I would do that.
Dr. Bedard, I think also that to be a seasoned counselor or a seasoned therapist has an aspect on handling things differently. Like, I think one of my biggest problems as a beginner is tolerating ambiguity. I'm so terrible in that because I have no experience. So I just think it's me, it's my mistake. But I think when you reach a level of experience and knowledge, you will be more in peace in your skin. Like you can say no, like explicitly, as well as saying yes, frankly.
Yeah, and listen, y'all, I didn't say no when I was getting my license. I'm just being honest. You want to get your hours, you're going to meet with people. Why do you think I worked 4 years with mandatory therapy? I'm trying to get my license. So yes, ambiguity, you will always deal with. Awkwardness, you will always deal with. Conflict, you will always deal with. All these things, gray areas, you'll always deal with, always. You will get used to it, but it doesn't get easier necessarily. You just get used to it. It's like grieving. You don't get used to grieving. You just get better at it. It's very similar because you're going to hear things, right, from people, and some things you hear from them are devastating. Not everything, but some things are devastating. And that's really hard. You know, over years of time, it's really difficult. So that's why taking care of yourself is also important. And as you learn and grow, absolutely, you'll get better at things and you'll learn what you're good at and not. And yeah, you'll learn all that. You'll learn all that stuff. Keep in mind too, you guys already have a set of experiences that you're bringing anyway with you, which will be helpful too. But that's why you have to do the associate, 1,500 hours. That's why it's helpful to you. Is anybody close to doing pre-practicum?
I am.
Yes.
Yeah, awesome. Man, good for you. That's great. Okay. Okay, I'm going to go to bed now. So I hope everyone has a good night, and we'll see you Saturday at 9. The next 2 Saturdays, right? Am I right about this? Counseling assessment.
Yeah, February the 18th, 9 to 11.
And then some of y'all are lucky to see me on Monday. If you're in advanced counseling, you're going to see me on Monday. That's going to be fun.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Yes, thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.